The brain is a very complex organ of our body, and science has yet to but barely begin to explain exactly how it works and why it works, and how to actually quantify this thing we call thoughts and memories, and just how everything it does, how that works as a whole. We start from a clump of cells, and it's developed from these clumps of cells by using atoms from its environment. And as we are born or created, however you'd like to put it, somehow the biological functions of our evolution already have the blueprints, so to speak, to create what is known as a human, or in the case of rats, a rat, or pigs, a pig. And this is just something that we've developed over the course of millions of years. But the brain is the one thing that's the most complicated of the organs. We've managed to reasonably explain what it does, but there's no real answer as of yet that we've been able to discern as of how and why it does what it does. Now, there are the, obvious, it does what it does to keep the rest of our body moving, but we don't know why it does it in the way of which it does it. These things we experience, called memories and thought, they're but electrical impulses moving throughout our brain. And we can't measure these, but maybe on like a electrical impulse type level. We somehow lack the scientific knowledge to quantify it in a realm outside of existential philosophical thinking. We can't really explain it due to things we may have yet to have discovered. So I was pondering this, and I'm probably wrong here, but I figured I wanted to share my thoughts on this anyways. We try to quantify thoughts, but we already know that it's these memories, these things, all of our experience is but little electrical impulses constantly moving throughout our brain. So perhaps instead of asking how we quantify a thought, we ask how to create a thought, I suppose. Suppose our memories aren't stored in any one spot or one portion of our brain. They're moving constantly, always moving, so as to never die or fade away. Electrical impulses to constantly staying as an electrical impulse, simply moving from one electrical diode, I don't know the term, I can't recall it at the moment, to another in a constant state of migration, thereby making it not stored in any one part of our brain, but constantly moving. The electrical impulses we see, that tell our body to move and to see, and that come from our senses and our experience, are all constantly moving outwards from the brain and inwards to the brain. And perhaps we can't quantify a thought because there's no one specific part of our brain dedicated to holding and maintaining it. Perhaps that's the reason, because once electrical impulses die, they're no longer useful. When we die, our brain only stays active for a very small amount of time before it shuts off completely. At this point, we have no memories, we have no function of our brain, we have no electrical impulses at all. They've completely evaporated, so to speak. They've ceased to exist. The electrical impulses are gone. They run out. They are no longer powered by anything. They escape. So perhaps instead of asking, let's see if I can explain this better. Perhaps the impulses inside of our brain are simply moving constantly, and that's, our eyes are sort of like a camera, and our heart and our brain are, well, it's sort of like a computer, but instead of having a hard drive, it simply has a system of electrical wiring and tubes that sends the process from one part to another, but instead of holding on to it in a chip or some sort of hard drive, it has a specific part dedicated specifically to continually sending the charge in and out of tubes until it needs to be retrieved. So say for every action a computer would do, there is a constant stream of electrical impulses moving from one wire to another in a constant motion. And if you unplug this computer, well, they simply stop. They cease. And you can never recover them or quantify them or pull them back out of the computer because it's lost. There's no longer, the impulses die the second the electricity stops, because there's nothing that the thoughts, or that the electricity, the impulses are stored on. So it simply ceases. When there's no power flowing, it simply stops functioning altogether, and it loses any charge that it has. Perhaps thoughts are somewhat like this. The only reason we lose them when we die, perhaps, is because they're not actually stored. They're simply moved. When we die, it's metaphorically like unplugging the computer that has no hard drive and is simply moving the impulses around constantly. It's completely dependent on that electric flow, as our bodies are dependent on sustenance, whether it be food, water, air. All of these play important factors in running this generator of a body that we have. And when any single important part ceases to work, then we simply can't, our brain simply shuts off due to nothing to power it, and we simply lose all of our memories and abilities to process altogether, just to the wind. This could explain brain trauma as well, and why certain areas of the brain being damaged lead to impairments in places, and why we can't exactly do something such as a brain transplant. It could be because there's no hard drive to our brain. It's simply there. You damage a part of it and it simply ceases to function properly. There's nothing. It's like cutting a wire on such a computer I mentioned previously. That function that wire, whatever was flowing through that wire in the moment, simply discharges into the wind and it's gone forever. And it's simply irreparable. So, at least by mechanical standards, whenever we damage areas of our brain, we lose part of the brain's function. Perhaps due to losing things altogether, memories and evolutionarily passed down traits that are built in to our own electrical impulses. We simply, let's see if I can explain it this way. We have certain areas of our brain that do certain things. Perhaps that's why the brain is made the way it is. Each area of the brain has certain areas it's made, and through biology we are created the same way almost consistently. And when we are created, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say we probably share our mother's electrical impulses. They are the mother's impulses which are passed down through the entire generation beforehand, all of the generations. So, due to this, we don't have to be taught to think. It's simply passed down to us by a brain while ours is still being created, which already knows how to function. So when your brain damaged, then it's simply certain things cease to work simply because you've now destroyed areas where very specific thoughts and specific memories are flowing through, and you can't just repair that because they're gone. This could explain amnesia and losing memories. You have to, in amnesia, you have to learn. Sometimes if it's bad enough, you have to relearn things all over, and this may be due to cutting off certain connections that are free-flowing. Because if if memory isn't stored anywhere in the brain, it has to be in constant motion. And if it's in constant motion, when it's taken out of motion or the wire is cut metaphorically, it simply dissipates into the wind and it's gone forever. You have to replace it or remake it. You have to repair the wire, and even then you won't get it back because it's already left the wire. It's gone into the universe. But it's the same thing. We have electrical impulses in our brain, and it's just like the current through an electrical wire. If you cut that wire, the electric current will flow out into just the air around you, and it'll dissipate and it'll just be gone. It doesn't. Same thing when we have brain damage. The brain activity will stop in that specific area sometimes, and it will simply be out of use or be less used, or certain parts will be less used, and that could be because we've disrupted the wires, so to speak, the connections, and we're losing all of the impulses that are being cycled through those connections to nothingness. This could also be a huge factor in why we can't simply transfer a brain to another. If there's no hard drive, so to speak, then there's no way to store what we have inside of our minds as we take the brain from one person and put it into another. It dissipates immediately, and you can't just reteach that, because the electrical impulses are given to us completely by a functioning brain as we are created inside of a body or some surrogate type of something. And it's the brain activity is simply passed down in the only way that evolution can do it naturally. It's given from one functioning brain to another. And when you separate that from the nerve endings which output this information to the rest of our body, it forgets. It is gone. That's why when you separate the brain, or even separate the head from the body, it stops. It's not just because it's no longer attached to the heart. This is why you can't just take out a brain and then zap it or somehow aid it like you can a heart in some cases. Because the brain doesn't have a backup or a hard drive or recovery system. When it's damaged or when it's severed, all of the electrical impulses escape. As if you were cutting a wire, it simply stops. This is why perhaps we can't do brain transplants, because when you separate the brain, there's no way to reteach it. Everything escapes through electrical impulses that exists, because everything that exists inside of the brain is in constant electrical motion. And when the brain stops constantly moving this electrical motion, or when it is damaged in one area, it simply ceases to function the way it originally did. The brain is an insanely complex thing, and thoughts are thoughts might be nothing more than electrical signals in constant motion. And this may be why we simply can't take a brain out and put it back in. Because when we separate it from that which is keeping it intact and running, and it simply forgets, because it sends electrical impulses to the heart, and it does this constantly. So if you separate it from the heart for too long, it will simply forget how to pump it, because the electrical impulses will be lost to whatever it is. It'll just be lost. That part of your brain will cease to understand what it's supposed to do. Which is why if you separate it from the body, it forgets how to control the body. It forgets it was ever attached or a part of a body, and it can't function without a body. So even if you reattach it with but a little bit of activity left, it will not be the same, because it's already forgotten that which has been biologically passed down from the nanosecond that it was starting to be created. It's simply forgotten. There's no backup for our mind. It just is in constant motion. And if you ever cut the wires without being able to keep those wires connected, then it ceases to exist. It literally loses its function. It's going off of what you would say pure memory. It simply is motion, electrical signals moving constantly. And when those electrical signals are destroyed and dissipated, when we take brain damage, you can't get them back unless your brain can find a way to repair itself. But it just depends on how much you lose in that time, whether or not there's any hope. That's why the brain is so complicated. That's why our experiences are so different from one person to the next. Because of all these things. The brain is you can lose or gain anything at some point. If you get brain trauma, it could lead to all kinds of mental illnesses because you're lacking certain functions of your brain in order to use things in a specific way that was biologically taught to you through these impulses. You are but 3D printed. Your brain is but 3D printed and taught by a brain that you were created by. When your mother was impregnated, it was her body's job to pass down not only your brain, but its ability to function, its ability to be used, and perhaps that's why I've got to stop here. This is already getting too long. Anyways, if you made it this far, thanks for listening.